type of debate. So for those who, this is me trying to be young and hip by the way, so go with me on this. For those of you who like iPhone games, what you'll notice is that the vast majority of iPhone games are actually just the same kind of games, predicated over and over and over again, right? So all those ones where you run around with swords and kill dragons and collect gold, they're all exactly the same, right? They have slightly different graphics and they behave slightly differently, but in essence they're the same engine, right? They're using the same kind of platform for a game, right? There's also like 10 different versions of Tetris. They're all really the same thing, but basically they work out to be the same type of idea. You just dress them up differently. Debates are like that. Lots of debates look different, they have different names, they seem like they're about completely different things, but underneath them they are the same core engine, right? They're asking you to understand the same sort of philosophical, logical problem that exists. It's just played out using different issues. So, that's called first principles debating. Now, if I have the time and I don't, there are 3 levels to first principles debating. Basic, intermediate, and advanced for those who really want to kick the crap out of their opponents. But today, what we're going to do is focus on the basic stuff. And the basic stuff is understanding that the vast majority of debates actually, at their simplest level, fall into 3 categories. And for the sake of this discussion tonight, I'm going to talk about debates that are about the role of government. Right, the most common type of debate, probably debates for those of you that have debated before, particularly those debating in high school, must have done a role of government debate before. And this is basically the fundamental debate about what it is we expect our governments to do. Why do we elect governments? What is their purpose? How much influence should they have over our lives? What type of things is it reasonable for them to make rules and laws about? And what kind of things should they stay out of and stay away from if they have the power to deal with them? That's what we call the role of government debate. Now, you're going to get thousands and thousands of them, which are basically like, should the government ban something? Should the government regulate something? Should the government have a policy about this? Should it make it harder or easier to do this or that? And all of them effectively fall into, or at least everyone I can think off the top of my head, fall into one of 3 categories. The first category is the classic trade-off debate. Trade-off debates are where the 2 teams each are arguing for a specific principle or idea or outcome where those are both objectively good things. Okay? Just because you're debating someone doesn't mean you have to disagree with absolutely everything they say. Okay? They don't have to be wrong about every syllable and sentence and idea and example they utter. You just have to be more right than them. In a trade-off debate, you're going to agree that both teams are pursuing fundamentally important things. But unfortunately, you can't have both of them at their maximum level. You have to decide on a trade-off, right? It's a zero-sum game. So if I have a small amount of money, I want to divide it between 2 of my friends, I can't give them both all of my money. I have to decide how much to give one or the other. That's not because I like one and not the other, but just logically, I can't give them both everything. I'm going to divide it and it has to be split. So in a trade-off debate, it's a zero-sum game. So, classic example of that in the role of government debates is accountability versus efficiency. So this is a question about what is the most important principle for how our government should operate. Obviously, it would be good if governments were both highly accountable and highly efficient. And when I say efficient, what I mean is that they have the ability to make decisions. Whether you like those decisions or not is a different issue. But the capacity to make decisions is pretty fundamental. If we elect a government and they're so gridlocked, they can't do anything, they can't pass a bill, they can't create a new law, they can't pass a budget, they can't make decisions, then what's the point? Nobody wins, nobody gets what they want. So there has to be a core level of efficiency, effectiveness of government. But we also want them to be highly accountable. We want to know that if we don't like them, we can get rid of them. We want to know that they're forced to listen to us. We want to know that even if the parties or the organisations that we support don't form the majority, that somehow we as the minority still get to have some kind of input on the system. The problem is, if you wanted to have a system that maximised one of those, it automatically eats in against the other one, even though they're both good things. That's just the fact. Let's take a simple example. Some parliaments in Australia have 1 chamber, 1 house. Some parliaments in Australia have 2. Now, it's not objectively the case that one is better than the other, right? They're just different. They operate differently. They are a different balance of that zero-sum question of efficiency versus accountability. Now, why is that the case? Because the more chambers of the parliament, the more houses, the more accountable it is. In other words, the harder it is for governments to get things done. The more people they have to negotiate with, the more hoops they have to jump through to get a law up. And every hoop they have to jump through means some other group of people they have to negotiate with. Now, that might not necessarily mean better laws or worse laws. It just means they can't ram things through quickly. Right? They have to negotiate. They have to take their time. At the very least, even in situations like we have in Victoria right now or in New South Wales, where one party controls both houses, just the fact that there is two houses slows the process down, because there are rules that says it has to be a period of time between when a bill leaves one house and is debated by the other. So that creates a gap in time where people can understand, wait, the government's just passed this bill through the lower house. Maybe we don't like that. We've got 2 weeks until they debate it in the upper house for us to mobilise and to protest and to make a big deal out of this to try and stop it. Right? That just on its own creates extra accountability, but it slows down the effectiveness. It means if there was some urgent emergency thing, the government can't get around that. It has to lay over the bill for 2 weeks. Right? So that reduces its effectiveness. Now, in theory, if 2 houses is more accountable, then 3 houses is even better. And 4 is better than 3, and 10 is better than 4, and 217,000 is better than whatever other number I said. But at some point, that breaks down, right? At some point, everyone would agree, this is absurd. Okay, this is the recipe for gridlock. We're never going to get anything done. You can't have a government that's forced to negotiate with everybody. That's why we elect parliamentarians in the first place, right? To get away from the idea of direct democracy, where all 22 million Australians have to be consulted on absolutely every decision. But where does that balance lie? That's the debate. So when you see a topic that says this House would, or we should abolish the Senate, sorry, I'm using world's language, that we should abolish the Senate, which is a very common topic for new debaters and something you might like to get at an Easters. It's not a debate necessarily automatically about is the Senate a good or a bad thing. When you see that topic, you should see that clash. That's what it's about. It's about efficiency versus accountability. And if you happen to know heaps about the Senate and good things the Senate has done and bad things the Senate has done, that's great. But even if you know jack shit about what the Senate has done, even if you couldn't name a single senator or a single committee they've ever done or a decision they've ever blocked or created, it doesn't matter. As long as you can see that it's accountability versus efficiency, then you're doing the right debate. You know what your core argument is. You're either saying, yes, we agree, we need as much accountability as we can get, but we need a more efficient government. We need governments that can make decisions. And right now, we don't think the system allows for that, or vice versa. Does that make sense? Heaps and heaps of debates take that form. Okay? The point of this is you don't have to learn shitloads of information about every possible topic to begin with. You can just focus on learning a few of these core things. The second thing is values debates. So unlike the trade-off, where both teams can happily agree that the idea or the principle that their opponents are fighting for is a completely valid and reasonable principle, just unfortunately they can't have that at the same time that you have your principle, a values debate is the opposite of that, where both sides are looking at the world in fundamentally different ways. They have completely incompatible views about what should happen. It's not a zero-sum game. Okay? One wants to annihilate the other. There is no desire to accommodate between the two views. So, classic example for that is big government versus small government, right? This is, in essence, what the debate in politics is in Western countries. Those who think governments should err on the side of being interventionist. Those who think it's right and appropriate for governments to make decisions that try to influence the way society operates, to change the behaviour of people in society, right? To promote their vision of a good outcome. Versus those who think the government should take a minimal position, that the government should try to interfere as little as possible, that individuals should make as many choices as is practical, even if some of those choices are negative for themselves or for society. When you boil it down, that is politics, right? That is the debate in Australia. That is left versus right when people talk about those terms. And lots of debates you do boil down to that. And those visions are just incompatible, right? That's why there are political parties that oppose each other based on those principles, because there isn't a middle ground between them. Right? They can agree on some things, but in essence, they have completely different vision. You either think it's right and appropriate for the government to set limits on speech, irrespective of what those limits are, that's a detail we don't need to worry about right now, or you think it's not, that the government should never set any limits. There's no middle ground between that. Either it's appropriate for them to be involved in that area, or it's not. Either you think it's right for the government to try to shape society in terms of the behaviour of people, take for example drugs, alcohol, smoking, etc. Or you think that's completely inappropriate for the government, that those are choices individuals should make. Now, whatever your answer to that is, you can't have them both. Even if you can sort of be sympathetic to them both in your head, you have to vote for one or the other. So, lots of values debates are that clash. The final clash are what I call cookie cutter debates. And these are debates that are really the same collection of arguments over and over. So if you learn to recognize them, once you've done one, you've done them all. So a great example of this is what we call ban versus regulate debates, or debates about vices. So if you think about debates about guns, or about gambling, or about drugs, they're really all, in essence, a clash of the same sets of arguments. So irrespective of which one of those things I'm talking about, people will make the same arguments. They'll say, we should regulate for this thing, whichever one of those it is, and there are many others. Because if we regulate it, if we make it legal under certain circumstances, we can better control it. Right? We'll know who's using it, who's accessing that thing, or who's buying it. We'll be able to better control the quality of that thing. So in the case of drugs, that means we'll be able to make sure the drugs are, more pure, less contaminated. Right? Or in the case of guns, it means we'll be able to make sure that people buy guns with, trigger protective guard thingies and in boxes with locks and all that kind of shit. Right? And if it's gambling, we'll know, what type of gambling they're doing. We'll know what the rules are. We'll know that the rules aren't unfair to players. They also say things like, if we don't regulate this, it'll go underground. And the underground version of it will be much more dangerous than the regulated version because we can't control the quality. We can't make sure it's fair. We can't make sure the right people are involved and the wrong people aren't. And actually, more of the wrong kinds of people will access that thing in a black market sense and in a regulated sense. I could go on and on, but you can see how it doesn't matter which of those things I'm talking about. They're the same arguments that just repeat over and over and over. Arguments about choice. It's my individual choice to have access to this thing. It's not for the government to decide whether I should have that or not. Right? Arguments about quality, arguments about safety, arguments about the public good, right, are all exactly the same over and over and over. Now, that's just 3 types, right? And I only talked about one set of topics, which is role of government topics. Those 3 debate types repeat themselves over and over in debates about economics, in debates about social policy, in debates about foreign policy, right? And the faster you learn to recognise those debate types when you see them, the faster in your prep and in debate you can cut to the really essential clash in the debate. You can find the real core of the debate. And the simple rule of particularly sloppy beginner debating is whoever spends the most time actually talking about the right issue wins. So let me be blunt. Most novice debates are shit. And judging them is a painful exercise. And largely, it's not because you're bad people or you're boring to listen to or depending on your sexuality that we find you unattractive. The reason is because you talk about the wrong shit. Right? And debate is supposed to be about one thing, you're off on some fucking tangent talking about some other thing because you're excited about that or you heard someone say it on the radio and it sounded good. Right? When the debate's actually asking you to confront a particular challenge. It's asking you to answer what are essentially unanswerable questions. That's why we debate them. There is no answer to big government versus small government, right? The answer is sometimes big government's right, sometimes small government's right. Okay, but in an individual debate, on an individual topic, on that day, in that room, one of them has to be right. Even if eternally we'll never resolve it. So the sooner you recognise what is that centre of the debate, what is that real clash, what does this debate really boil down to, and the more time you spend talking about that, your chance of success will be enormously improved. So any quick questions? I'm really trying to rush because I'm short on time and, this is done. Nope.
Sorry, I might just interrupt for a second for a short bureaucratic announcement.
Sure.
You've got more time to wait.
Sure.
For those of you who come in late or who haven't yet filled in one of these forms, I'm going around with more. Also, if you have a form, you have returned it, pass it to me as you go along. So just an open your form. I'm sorry.
All right.
You pop them around.